So in Marvel Future Fight, we have lots of characters, but even more uniforms. For 255 characters, we have a whopping 433 uniforms. That's a lot of different costumes. And the costumes range in value from pretty much useless or gold cost uniforms all the way to massively god tier with some seasonal stuff that's only available a few days a year sprinkled in between. But with 2023 hitting the halfway point mark, I decided it would be a good idea to look back at the first half of the year, January to June, to the end of June, and look at the 8 worst uniforms that we got. Because if nothing else, it can help you avoid those uniforms if you were considering buying them at all. But also, it'll help you maybe pick out in future updates uniforms that seem similar to the ones I'm about to talk about in case you missed the dedicated reviews for them. So kicking off the list at number 8 is AntMan. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Alex, you tier 4'd AntMan, you said his uniform was really good, and I'm sticking by that. I do think the uniform is good. Let me explain. I'm making a video of the top 8 worst uniforms of 2023, and I'm starting off with a uniform that I think is good. Is he having a stroke on camera? No, not yet. The thing with AntMan is not that the uniform is bad. The uniform itself is strong. He has a lot of high damage, AoE, and it's very easy to play, right? Super easy proc rotation, and he's got really cool animations. So it's not like they shortchanged him on the animations. It's not like they shortchanged him on the PvE power. Here's the problem with AntMan. There's a twofold problem. The first problem is that knowing the devs' release cycle, they did AntMan dirty. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you take a look now, because we can do this with videos like this, the release cycle for AntMan was as follows. AntMan was to be nestled between 2 Spider-Verse characters. Now, of course, there's a pretty big gap between February and June between between Peter and Miles, but that's essentially the problem, right? You have Spider-Man coming out before Ant-Man, and Spider-Man has, you know, obviously the PvP stuff. He has the iframe ignore, and they genuinely could have made Ant-Man PvP, by the way. For those of you thinking they couldn't have made Ant-Man PvP because of Spider-Man, remember, elusive hero. He has 87% guaranteed dodge. If they had just given him a bunch of HP and a bunch of damage reduction, he could have tanked the hit, and then like the first couple of hits triggered this guaranteed dodge. And then, you know what? He's actually really hard to kill, and he actually was a PvP threat back in the day. You actually could use Ant-Man, and I did, to great effect, to kill Jean Grey in her Blast Hero era before she became Universal. So Ant-Man has a history of being PvP. So okay, fine. They released Spider-Man, so they don't want to release Ant-Man as PvP right after. Sure. But then they release Ant-Man for PvE knowing they're going to release Miles, and he's going to be so fucking cranked that he's going to make Ant-Man look terrible. It was unnecessary to make Ant-Man so mid, knowing that in a few months you're going to drop Miles. Like, if Ant-Man was about as good as Miles, let's say 10% worse than Miles, then I could understand it. And if they'd given Ant-Man a couple more abilities, but they gave him fewer abilities and they made him like 20-30% worse than Miles. What was the point, right? In hindsight, it was better to just completely dodge Ant-Man, as sad as that sounds, because the devs clearly are trying to push this Spider-Verse narrative. Coming in at number 7 is a Miles Morales uniform, but it's not the one that you think. It's not this one right here. It's the Anniversary uniform. This was a joke in hindsight. Not only was it a joke because it was going to get replaced in just a few months, like literally 4 months later, and it got replaced, but because the leadership only applied to Spider-Man Peter Parker. That was just an insane decision by the devs. Such a stupid idea. They did this shit with other uniforms as well. They really need to stop doing it, right? People are still pissed to this day about Wave's leadership applying to Namor when you can't use them in content because Namor is a combat villain and Wave is a speed mutant, speed hero, right? It just makes no sense at all. It's so frustrating to do shit like this. It almost never pays off. It's not thematically interesting to just have a leadership for one character, especially if the leadership doesn't buff you the same way. Like, what kind of subservient bullshit are you talking about here when you talk about that stuff? Now, thankfully, Miles got a new uniform that, you know, rectified everything, so this doesn't have to be number 1. But honestly, this would be much higher up on the list if it were not for this uniform fixing things. Last Spider-Verse character on this list, believe it or not, yes, Miles Morales has a friend, 2099 Miguel O'Hara, coming in at number 6 here. And unfortunately, this is a uniform that just didn't go far enough. Sort of like Ant-Man, right? Very cool visually, very easy to play, you know, very nice and aesthetically and stuff like that, whatever. But they just didn't give Miguel enough weapons. and he was just so easily overshadowed by other characters from the past or from the future. You know, that it just doesn't make any sense to build him, unfortunately, unless it's just you're doing it for aesthetic reasons and stuff like that, which is fine. And it's certainly a good reason to play this game. You know, you don't have to play it to be meta, but it's just a bit frustrating that they couldn't have given him just a little bit more. You know, I don't think they would have broken him, and that's largely the argument for these characters. They wouldn't be broken with just one more ability, right? It's not like Miguel is on the cusp of dominating the meta, and if they just give him one more ability, one more stat line, he's going to just erupt and just destroy the game. And we're not even talking about free characters here. Miguel's paywall, right? Yeah, yo, you can get him from dimension missions. Yeah, good luck with that, right? A lot of people, if he's good, they're going to pay for him. So there's really no reason to make him mid. And this is sort of the thing that puzzles me, is these characters are releasing now and they're mid. Miguel is worse than speed characters released last year. Like, what is going on? It makes no sense. Speaking of not making sense, at number 5, Wartiger. While Blue Dragon becomes Giga OP and Shadow Shell becomes a replacement for Black Widow, Wartiger just sits around picking his nose. He doesn't even get the revive passive that Sunbird gets. Now, you can chalk this one up to reverse sexism, if that's even a thing, but really, the thing that hurts about Wartiger is he looks so cool, and he has such cool abilities, and he doesn't have any basis in popularity because these are original characters, so why not make him OP, right? You're giving him you're letting him summon tornadoes and giant rocks and shit. He gets to blow up the ground. Why not make him OP? What is the danger of making him a little bit stronger than the average transcended combat type? Is he gonna replace Moon Knight tier 4 for ABX? No, he's not. Like get real. Is he gonna replace Carnage tier 4 for PvP? No, of course not. He doesn't have an immortality artifact or passive. So it really just doesn't make any sense to me why they made him so bad, like so crazy mid. And the thing is, they gave him a cool aesthetic, right? Really cool design by Danny Koo, and they gave him cool animations. And then they just made him suck, bro. 15% heal, a 15% heal. Are you joking? Like what? And don't tell me they don't know how to make the Warriors of the Sky strong, right? You can't tell me that because Blue Dragon and Shadow Shell exist, and they're like, and at least one of them is good before tier 4. So it's not even that, right? It's not even that. Raven coming in at number 4. Now, I struggled whether to put him higher on the list or lower on the list because now that we know the Kraven movie is coming out this year, which, by the way, blindsided me. I had no idea it was this soon that it was going to be released. But this makes more sense now, so I won't put him too much higher on the list. But this uniform is still a massive flop in terms of how it looks versus how it plays. And they basically failed from 2 points of view because not only did they make him weak offensively, which is kind of sad, but then they also made his support ability suck. His support ability is just straight up worse than Mystique's, and Mystique has been in the game since, what, 2020? So you're telling me 3 years later and you guys can't power creep the supports a little bit? It just makes absolutely no sense. And like, kudos to the design team that made up these different animations. These are really cool. Nets, you got spears, you got laser beam tits, right? You got all this cool stuff. You got this red smoke. It looks awesome, right? It looks awesome. And then the balancing team was like, yeah, we're just gonna shit all over your work and make him just bad. You know, we're just gonna not check his damage. We're not gonna balance things properly, and he's just gonna be bad. I'm guessing he's gonna be really good when his movie comes out, and then we'll all be like, oh, sick. But it would have been cool to have Kraven be, you know, whatever, 50% stronger. Even if they had made him for PvP. Like, again, let's get real. He wasn't going to overtake the meta, right? But he could have been cool. He could have been interesting to use. They could have given him a revive. It would have just been fun. Instead, we get nothing. At least with characters like Toxin last year, like, they have some value. They have some support and shit like that. But look at this. 35-35 for Sinister 6 allies. Again, Mystique's is better, and it applies to all allies. It's such a confusing decision. It makes no sense. Why did they think this was so OP when it's clearly not? Cruising into the top 3 aboard the SS Garbage is Kitty Pryde. And speaking of speed paywall uniforms that just don't do anything, Miguel has quite a bit of help here. Now, yes, she does have a good mutant leadership, 60% attack and 6% crit rate. But Polaris is just straight up better. And Polaris came out last year. So remember that, right? Polaris came out last year, no uniform required, okay? And both paywall characters, but no uniform required. And she has a better support when you combine that with the leadership. So what did they do to make Kitty better? They gave her some boats. Oh, did they make her like a better support? No. Did they make her like really powerful for PvE? No. Did they make her for PvP? No. They're just like, we're just gonna phone this one home. Again, the balancing team just doesn't try sometimes, and it's so obvious. You could easily crank Kitty's damage by 50%. They could just multiply. They could just add a 1.5 times multiplier to all her damage, and she still wouldn't be that good. And you know that's true because they reduced Jean Grey's damage by 500%, and she's still good, right? They put a minus 5x multiplier on Adam Warlock's damage, and he's still good. So don't tell me that these other characters in between can't be good if they just multiply their damage by 1.5 or 2 or even 3. And again, the art department, the art team, they went off, dude. Look at this shit. Fire, water. This looks super cool. You got boats and shit, right? Why couldn't she deal a lot of damage? What would it have done to the game? Oh, well, you need an anchor. She's literally an anchor. That's what she is. She's an anchor of a shit uniform so that you realize what good uniforms look like because they don't look like Kitty Pryde. Since we're talking about mutants, we might as well talk about number 2, which in my heart is number 1, Sabertooth. Now, really, the only good thing they did for this dude is give him a good artifact, which gives him the immortality passive. And maybe in the future, when he gets to tier 4, he'll be relevant again. I'm probably guessing that's what they're banking on because they chose one of the ugliest outfits alive for Sabertooth here. So this is probably not what they want him to look like in the end game. But it really sucks that for now, we just get to stare at this dude and he gets to collect dust because he hits like a wet noodle. It's hilarious how bad his damage is. You know, despite having all these buffs, despite having all these effects, he really just does not deal any damage. And again, it's just such an easy fix. I mean, in his case, unlike Kitty, unlike Miguel, they actually gave him a bunch of abilities. They gave him iframe ignore, right? They gave him some cool stuff. But then they just made his damage so hilariously low that there's no way he can compete. There's no way. They would have to ban every tier 4 in the game. If they banned every tier 4 in the game, he still wouldn't be meta, but he would be a lot closer. And thus we come to number 1, Rocket Raccoon. What can I say about this dude other than he was the lead character, the star of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and he got done so massively dirty. I mean, let alone this frustrating shit where you give Groot 40% energy attack, or you give Gamora 40% energy attack, or Drax, which literally does nothing. So his passive, only applying to like 6 characters, doesn't actually apply to half of those 6 characters, which is, again, mind-bogglingly stupid. And it's just a very easy change where you just remove the word energy and change it to all. It's literally fewer letters, so I don't understand. But that combined with the fact that they just wasted such a cool concept with his first skill being able to be spammed, and they just made him shit. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. They could have done so many cool things here just off the top of my head, right off the top of my head. Rather than this shit dealing damage and potentially triggering your proc, they could have had this be a charge up. So you could have pressed this skill and hold it down, and he like charges up his gun and like it starts sparking and stuff, right? Like as if he's in, you know, he's really holding down the trigger, but it hasn't, you know, it's malfunctioning or whatever. And then once you charge it up 3 times and it creates like the biggest animation, then you switch to another skill and you pop off, right? And then it could just be an easy way to pass the proc on a concept that we've known about in the game for like 8 years on Rocket. It's a very simple concept. You have it on a character like Daisy Johnson, except she just presses 1 button. So again, explain this to me, right? Explain this to me. This is an 80% proc, right? And you have to press this shit 3 times to bump it up to a good enough level, and then you have to switch to another skill, right? So all that work, pressing the skill 3 times to get a halfway decent proc, okay? And it's going to trigger your rotation. It's going to trigger your obelisk or your CTP while you're pressing it. Or you just press her 3rd skill. There, it's done. You have the proc right there. It's 180 proc for 10 fucking seconds. So you can lollygag and yada, yada, yada and dodge shit, and then you can pop off at the last second and have a huge burst of damage. And look at this. No damage. Look, she even gets an iframe. She even gets to dodge. She even gets to back away so that you can reassess the situation. This is a character from 7 years ago or 8 years ago. This is like this character's older than some of you watching this video. And somehow they look at Daisy and they're like, huh, let's make a character in 2023 that has a worse version of that because we're idiots and we don't understand how to balance our own game. Anywho, that's why Rocket is #1, and it's really sad because the movie was amazing. And it's one of the few times where the movie actually outdoes the game like the characters in game. It's usually about the same, or usually the game goes a little bit further. But in this case, they massively dropped the ball with Rocket. Honestly, I think they could still buff him if they just change this shit to deal 0 damage, and they change the proc to being 180, just like Daisy's. They can make it for 1 attack instead of 2. And then they just change his passive to being all attack for the Guardians. Honestly, he should give guard break immunity as well, so that you could actually use this team for PvP with Groot's synergy stuff. But what do I know? What do I know? I'm not a genius game dev who gives energy attack to Drax. So, yeah. Anyways, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know if that increased your blood pressure. Thanks so much for watching. Smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.